ever get kind of sucked into those online debates, about the Bible?
Oh, yeah.
Someone's always saying like, oh, the Bible's not historically accurate.
Yep.
Or like comparing it to Hammurabi's code.
Right.
And honestly, it's like, come on, can we just have a good conversation about this?
Yeah, those public discussions, I don't know, feels like they sometimes miss like the nuances of how we even understand history in the first place.
Exactly. Especially when we're talking about like ancient cultures, which is, well, what we're doing right now with this deep dive. We're going deep into biblical interpretation.
Looking forward to it.
Yeah, we've got some super interesting lecture transcripts and discussions from an actual university course on the Bible. So yeah, buckle up.
It's fascinating how we approach something from thousands of years ago, right?
It is. Like, we want all this evidence and objective sources, but like, honestly,
Right.
even for recent stuff, that can be hard to find.
Absolutely. It's true. Imagine trying to, I don't know, hold your own life story to those standards. Like, nobody can give a perfectly objective account of their life.
Exactly. With multiple sources for every detail.
Yeah, exactly. But it doesn't mean your personal experiences are less real because you can't, like, prove it to some historian. Right?
Exactly. So, like, how can we expect that kind of evidence from something as, I don't know, complex and old as the Bible, right?
And that's where I think understanding these different schools of thought within biblical scholarship even is really helpful. Because you've got, on the one hand, you've got the minimalists who, they tend to be pretty skeptical of the Bible's historical claims, right?
Right, yeah.
And then on the other end of the spectrum, you have the maximalists, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they are more likely to take the Bible as, as historically reliable, although not always in a literalistic sense.
So when we're thinking about, like, I don't know, the stories about the patriarchs like Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob.
Yeah.
We're not like digging up tablets with, Abraham was here carved into them.
Well, that's a great point, and it's a great example, because we don't, like you said, we don't have that direct archaeological evidence, like a business card from Abraham or something. But someone like Kitchen, for example, and he kind of falls into that maximalist camp, he would say, well, look, just because we don't have proof doesn't mean the details couldn't be historically accurate. It's more about asking, like, given what we know about the ancient world, is it plausible? Could it have happened this way?
I like that, yeah.
Yeah.
It's less about trying to prove it and more about kind of stepping back and seeing the bigger picture.
Right.
Right.
I think
We're putting together a puzzle, and we've got these different pieces, archaeology, cultural stuff, like what was going on back then and how people were writing, like, was it more like a history book or a poem? Or a metaphor?
Right. And that's what makes it so interesting, right? It's not just this like cut and dry thing. We're going beyond just kind of those surface level arguments that we see online all the time and actually like digging in and, like you said, looking for those puzzle pieces. We're getting into the nitty gritty, the complexities of how do we actually interpret and understand and make sense of the Bible.
Okay, so we're talking about complexity. Hit me with it. What are some specific places where this, taking a deeper look can really lead to some, I don't know, maybe surprising insights?
Well, how about this, right? We could start with a claim that I'm sure you've heard before.
Okay.
That there's like no evidence for the Exodus.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
That's a big one, right? People love to just like throw that out there and it's like case closed, no proof, no Exodus, end of story.
Oh, yeah. I've heard that one used to just shut down any conversation about it, for sure.
But the thing is, often I think that kind of claim misses some really important nuances about, historical evidence in general.
Okay.
Like Egyptologist James Hoffmeyer, he makes this really interesting point.
Okay.
In his book, Israel in Egypt, he basically says, look, there's actually very little archaeological evidence for an event that most scholars accept as fact.
Really?
Which is the reign of Pharaoh Amenhotep III.
Wait, so we're talking like an actual pharaoh?
Mm-hmm.
And there's not really concrete proof that he was even around?
Not a ton, but, scholars, they pretty much accept that, yeah, he was pharaoh.
Right.
Because of textual evidence, the historical context, all that.
So it's like, why the different standard
when
it comes to the Bible?
Exactly. It makes you think, right? Like, what are we willing to accept as evidence and what are we not? Especially with these ancient texts.
Totally.
And, while we're on the topic of potentially controversial interpretations, what about the Sabbath? Have you ever heard the idea that, the Israelites maybe borrowed that from other cultures in the ancient Near East?
I have heard that. And in fact, isn't that where that word comes from?
That's what people say.
Yeah. They say, oh, well, the Akkadian Sabbatu, right? That's like the same thing. So
Right. And it sounds pretty convincing when you first hear it, because I mean, it's like right there in the name almost, right?
yeah.
But here's the thing, and this is where, like we've been talking about, digging a little deeper really matters. The Akkadian Sabbatu, it referred to lunar phases, not a 7-day cycle. And what's even more interesting, it was associated with days that were like kind of thought to be unlucky. Times when people would like avoid doing certain activities. So not exactly a day of rest and worship like we see with that idea of the Sabbath in the Bible.
So almost the opposite, really.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, not a day you'd want to like, go out and start a new business or something.
Right.
And then when you think about the theological significance of the Sabbath in the Bible, like the fact that it's connected to creation, God's covenant with his people.
Right.
It really does seem like it's, kind of uniquely Israelite, which again doesn't mean they didn't borrow ideas from other cultures around them. But I think it just shows how we've got to be careful about just taking like these surface level connections and making huge assumptions.
Yeah. 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 Like there's always more to it than meets the eye kind of with this stuff. Are there other examples you think of like areas where we're digging a little deeper can challenge, I don't know, some common assumptions we might have about the Bible?
Well, for sure. And actually, this next one's a big one. And it's something that people, I think, often get tripped up on.
Okay.
And that is the role of women in ancient Israel.
Okay. Yeah. Definitely a sensitive topic for sure. And easy to like bring our own modern values into and all of that.
Totally. And even those of us who study this stuff, for a living, we have to constantly be checking ourselves.
Right.
Because it's so easy to let those biases creep in, right?
Yeah.
We have to remember different cultural context.
Yeah.
The world of the Bible.
Yeah.
Very, very different from our world today.
So how do we even begin to understand something like that? Like the role of women in ancient Israel without, our 21st century worldview taking over.
Right. That's the $1 million question. And that's where I think good scholarship can be so helpful, because you've got scholars like Carol Myers, for example, who in her book, Discovering Eve, she really challenges a lot of assumptions about women in the ancient world and in the Bible specifically.
Okay. So what's her take on it?
Well, she shows how, like, contrary to what some people might think, women, they were deeply embedded in the social and economic fabric of their communities. They weren't just, stuck at home all the time.
Interesting. Yeah, because I think that is kind of the stereotypical image that a lot of us get.
Right. And so Myers is pointing to evidence that women were active participants in things like agriculture, managing households.
Okay.
They were even involved in some religious rituals, which I think challenges some traditional interpretations for sure.
Definitely. And I mean, and even just thinking about like the Bible itself, right? We've got Deborah, Huldah, the daughters of Zalphahad.
Absolutely.
Like there are all these examples of women who like did not fit neatly into those boxes.
Right, exactly. Like they were there, they were powerful, they were making things happen.
So again, going back to what we were talking about before, there's always more to the story, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
It's like if we really want to understand, and we don't want to just like stay at the surface level. If we want to really understand, we've got to be willing to dig and to explore and to not be afraid of those complexities.
100%. And to realize too that like, yes, the Bible reflects a patriarchal culture, absolutely, but it also points towards something different.
Right. Yeah.
Especially as you move from the Old Testament into the New Testament.
Yeah. No, you're reminding me of that passage in Galatians 3:28, I think.
Yeah.
Where Paul is saying like, there is neither Jew nor Greek, slave nor free, male nor female, for you are all one in Christ Jesus.
Exactly.
And even now those words are radical. It's like, whoa. It's like even back then there was this push toward like a different way of seeing each other, a different way of being in the world.
Right. And I think that's the power and the beauty of really engaging with the Bible thoughtfully in a deep way. It challenges us to not just like read these stories, but to think about them, to ask those hard questions. And then ultimately, I think to really allow those discoveries, whatever they might be, to actually shape how we live in the world.
It's kind of like what we've been saying this whole time about like, how can we move past those surface level interpretations, the ones that dominate those like online arguments, but don't really grapple with the really interesting stuff.
Right. It's easy to get stuck there, but hopefully taking this deeper dive with these texts like we have today and looking at like, different scholarship and these different case studies, it helps us see like, oh, there's a much bigger picture here than we might have realized.
It makes me think about something you said earlier, like about how even with some of the, difficult stuff, the Bible ultimately points toward a more just and equitable future.
Yeah. And I think that's such an important thing to remember because it's easy to get bogged down in some of the,
the details.
Yeah, the details, exactly. But when you kind of zoom out and look at the historical context, it becomes clear that, like the Bible doesn't shy away from some of the, reality, the harsh realities even of the world that it was written in. But it also presents this very different vision for what could be, like a world transformed by God's love and justice.
Yeah. And when you think about some of those passages we were talking about, like, this idea of a world without these social hierarchies where everyone's equal in Christ, like it makes you wonder how differently we might live if we really, truly embrace that.
That's the question, isn't it? I mean, if that's really the end goal, then what does it mean for us? How do we, whether we come to this as people of faith or just as people wanting to see a better world, I mean, how do we work toward that kind of transformation in our own time and place?
Yeah, that's a big question. I feel like we could do a whole other deep dive on that. But
many, many deep dives.
Yeah, for real. But I do feel like we've only kind of, I don't know, scratched the surface a little bit today.
For sure.
But like in a good way,
Yeah, in a way that hopefully like makes you want to keep digging and keep asking questions.
Yes, exactly.
Because, I mean, that's the beauty of these ancient texts is that, no matter how many times you come back to them, they always have something new to teach you or to challenge you with.
So as we kind of wrap up our time together today, what's one thing, if you had to pick one, that you hope our listeners will like take away from our conversation today?
Don't be afraid to ask those hard questions about the Bible, to dig deeper. We talked about different perspectives and like, don't be afraid of those. Explore those and then allow those discoveries, whatever they are, to shape how you understand, your own faith, your own place in the world.
I love that. Don't just read it, wrestle with it, question it, and let it challenge you to live differently.
Well, this has been awesome. Thanks for taking this deep dive with us.
Thanks for having me.